His lips were turning blue. The billionaire heir was choking, seconds from death, and the only person close enough to save him was the janitor that no one ever noticed. She pressed her mouth to his, praying it wasn't too late. But when his eyes shot open, what he whispered would change everything. "Hello, my amazing story family. I'm excited to have you here with me today because what you're about to hear will leave you amazed. But first, before we get into the story, I need one little favor from you. Please hit that subscribe button if you're ready for a story that'll give you goosebumps, and also drop a comment telling me your city because I love knowing where my story family is tuning in from around the world. And if you've already subscribed and joined this story family, you are welcome back. Tomorrow I'm bringing you another incredible story that you absolutely won't want to miss. Now, let's jump right into today's story and see what unfolds. The sound of breaking glass rang across the dining hall, sharp as a gunshot. A crystal wine goblet rolled across the polished oak floor, spilling its dark red contents in a slow river. Gasps followed. Heads turned. In the middle of it all, Adrian Cole, the only son of one of America's most feared billionaires, stood frozen, his lips pressed shut, his hand trembling. And beside him, a janitor in a faded blue uniform had just committed the unthinkable. Joyce Meyer. Her hands shook as she lowered herself back, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She had done it. She had kissed him. Right there, in front of executives, waiters, and wealthy men who thought her presence was as invisible as the dust she cleaned. The room was silent, except for the clink of a fork someone accidentally dropped. The young billionaire's face was pale, his jaw set tight. Everyone knew what they had seen. A janitor had kissed Adrian Cole. But no one knew why. Not yet. The night had started like any other board dinner. The Cole family empire gathered in one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, the kind where chandeliers glowed like captured starlight and every table was lined with white roses imported daily from Europe. The senior executives raised their glasses, laughing, pretending loyalty to the Coles while quietly calculating their own gains. Adrian sat at the head of the table, the golden heir to a kingdom built on oil and steel, dressed in a navy suit that cost more than most people made in a year. But he wasn't laughing. He never really did. Adrian Cole was 28, white, tall, with the kind of presence that made strangers stop mid-step. His dark hair was slicked back, his cufflinks shone, and yet his gray eyes carried something empty. People thought wealth was freedom, but for Adrian, it was a cage gilded so beautifully that most people mistook it for paradise. He swirled his glass of wine, letting the ruby liquid catch the candlelight. He was tired of these dinners, tired of these men who called him son in one breath and whispered behind his back in the next. His father, Richard Cole, ruled with an iron grip, and Adrian had grown up under that shadow. Tonight was no different. His father's chair sat empty. Richard never wasted time on dinners, but his influence hung in the air like smoke. Across the room, Joyce moved quietly between tables, unseen by most. She carried a tray of empty glasses, her step steady, her eyes lowered. To them, she was background, the one who mopped floors and emptied trash. No one at that table knew that before this job, she had been a top student back in Jamaica, or that her dream of becoming a nurse had been crushed by the weight of responsibility after her father died. Joyce's life was small in their eyes. But she saw more than they realized. She saw the way two executives leaned in too closely, their words hushed but sharp. She saw the way Adrian's drink had been left untouched, though a waiter had just refilled it. And she saw something else, something no one else in that room paid attention to. The faint shimmer of powder dissolving into the red wine. Her breath caught. For a moment, the world slowed. She stared at the glass, her tray wobbling in her hand. She had been cleaning long enough to know smells and stains, enough to know when something didn't belong. She wasn't certain, but her gut told her the truth. That wine wasn't safe. and Adrian Cole was about to drink it. Joyce froze, panic screaming inside her. Who would listen to her? She was a janitor. If she shouted now, they'd throw her out. If she grabbed the glass, they'd say she was crazy. Her heart hammered. Adrian lifted the glass. She moved. The tray in her hand clattered against a chair as she darted forward, the world gasping at her audacity. Adrian's hand paused, startled. And then, before she even had time to think, Joyce pressed her lips against his, firm and desperate, forcing his mouth shut before he could sip the poisoned drink. The glass slipped from his fingers and shattered. Gasps filled the room. Adrian shoved her back, his chair screeching across the floor. "What the hell?" he started, but the words died in his throat as the smell rose from the broken glass. A smell he recognized but couldn't place. Something bitter. Something wrong. The executive stared, eyes wide, pretending shock, pretending innocence. Joyce stood trembling, her eyes locked on his, silently begging him to understand. But Adrian's pride flared hotter than reason. He saw not her desperation but the humiliation of what had just happened. A janitor. A kiss. In public. The room whispered. Adrian's jaw clenched. He could feel the stares of every man at that table, could hear the unspoken mockery. The great heir kissed by a cleaning girl. Joyce lowered her gaze, heat flooding her face. She knew her life had just changed. Whether for good or for ruin, she couldn't yet tell. Hours earlier, the night had seemed simple. Adrian had left his penthouse on Fifth Avenue under the warm glow of the setting sun. He had everything: chauffeur-driven cars, polished marble floors at home, walls lined with art worth millions. But inside he felt nothing. He had inherited privilege but never freedom. His father had dictated his choices since birth. Who he could date, what business he must study, even how he spoke in public. Tonight's dinner was supposed to be just another event. He hadn't expected danger. Joyce, meanwhile, had started her shift the way she always did, arriving early, tying her hair back under her simple scarf, slipping into the uniform that made her invisible. She took pride in her work, not because it was glamorous, but because it was honest. Every corner she scrubbed reminded her of her father's voice back in Kingston. Work is work, Joyce. Never let them tell you you are less. She didn't know her path would collide with Adrian's in such a way. But fate has a way of using the unnoticed to change the powerful. By the time the broken glass was swept away and the whispers softened, Adrian's life had already shifted. He didn't know it yet, but nothing about that night would leave him unchanged. And Joyce, the janitor who kissed him to save his life, would soon discover she had stepped into a storm far larger than she had ever imagined. The air in the restaurant hung heavy, as if the chandeliers themselves had witnessed too much. The shattered glass was gone, swept away by quick hands, but the memory of what had happened remained stamped on every face in the room. Joyce stood near the doorway now, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her eyes lowered. Every nerve in her body screamed for her to run, to escape the humiliation. But her feet wouldn't move. She knew that if she left without saying anything, the whispers would write her story for her. Adrian sat stiffly, his chair pulled back from the table. His jaw tightened, his gray eyes fixed on the woman who had dared to cross the invisible line between their worlds. "Explain yourself," he said finally, his voice low but sharp. Heads turned. Executives leaned forward, eager for drama that might distract from their own secrets. Joyce swallowed hard. "Sir, the drink," she whispered, her accent soft but steady. There was something in it. Adrian frowned. "What are you talking about?" She lifted her chin slightly, though her voice trembled. "I saw it. When the waiter poured, something dissolved. A powder. I don't know what it was, but it didn't belong there." The table erupted in murmurs. Some scoffed openly. One executive chuckled and shook his head. A janitor lecturing us about fine wine, he sneered. Adrian's face hardened, but not in defense of her. His pride bristled. To him, it felt like a performance, a way for her to excuse what she had done. His life was one long parade of people trying to get close to him, trying to use him. How could he believe her? Still, he couldn't ignore the smell that rose when the glass shattered. Something bitter, something wrong. Joyce clasped her hands tighter. "I only wanted to stop you," she whispered. "I had no other way." Her words echoed, but no one replied. Later that night, when the dinner ended, Adrian walked out into the cool Manhattan air. The streets glowed with the soft amber of street lamps, and the skyscrapers around him pulsed with life. The city never slept, but tonight it felt restless, as if it too knew something had shifted. He slipped into the back seat of his Blacktown car, the leather cold against his palms. His driver asked no questions, just pulled into the night traffic. Adrian's mind replayed the moment again and again. The janitor's face, the fear in her eyes, the kiss that had stolen the air from his lungs. He should have been furious. He was furious. But beneath the anger, something gnawed at him. What if she was right? He clenched his fists. He hated doubt. It was weakness. His father always said, "Never show cracks. People will pour poison into them." Adrian stared out the window at the blurred lights. Cracks were already there. Back at the restaurant, Joyce slipped into the staff hallway, her heart pounding. She pressed her back against the wall, her breaths coming fast and shallow. "What have you done, Joyce?" she whispered to herself. She thought of her small apartment in Brooklyn, where her younger brother was probably heating leftovers for dinner, waiting for her. She thought of her mother back in Jamaica, who still called once a week to ask if she was safe. Safe. She laughed bitterly under her breath. How could she be safe now? She had kissed a billionaire heir in front of his entire board. Tomorrow the story would spread like wildfire. She would be mocked, shamed, maybe even fired. But worse than all of that was the truth she couldn't ignore. She had seen the powder in his glass. She had smelled the bitterness when it broke. If she had hesitated for even a second, Adrian Cole might have swallowed death in front of his closest allies. She squeezed her eyes shut. She hadn't imagined it. She knew what she saw, and someone in that room had wanted him gone. The next morning, sunlight poured into Adrian's penthouse through wide glass windows designed to catch the rising sun. He stood shirtless in front of the floor-to-ceiling panes, staring at the city below. Manhattan stretched out in endless grids, alive and buzzing. He had barely slept. His mind kept circling back to her, the janitor with the steady eyes. Joyce Meyer. He should have reported her. He should have had her thrown out immediately. Yet he hadn't. Something about the way she said, "I only wanted to stop you," kept replaying. Adrian Cole wasn't used to people risking anything for him. Most people risked nothing but demanded everything. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from his father. "Richard Cole. Heard about the incident. Handle it. Quietly. Don't embarrass us." Adrian's chest tightened. His father never asked for details. He expected control. Power. Silence. Adrian slipped on his shirt and fastened the buttons slowly. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure silence was an option. At the same time, across the river in Brooklyn, Joyce sat on the edge of her narrow bed. The small apartment smelled faintly of rice and fried plantains from the night before. Her brother's schoolbooks lay scattered on the table, his sneakers tucked neatly by the door. She ran a hand through her hair and whispered, "God, what did I do?" But even as shame burned her cheeks, she felt the weight of something heavier. She had stepped into a world that wasn't hers, a world of men in suits of power and poison. And yet, She couldn't regret saving him. Because deep down she knew the truth. Adrian Cole's life was in danger. And now, whether she wanted it or not, her life was tied to his. The following day at Cole Enterprises, the building's lobby hummed with its usual rhythm. Polished shoes clicking against marble floors, the smell of roasted coffee drifting from the cafe, voices rising and falling like waves. Executives swept past in sharp suits, their eyes focused on profit and power. Joyce pushed her cleaning cart through the hallway, her head lowered, her mind buzzing. Whispers followed her like shadows. "That's her," someone murmured. "The janitor." She kissed him. She gripped the handle of her cart tighter, her eyes fixed ahead. Every whisper sliced deeper, but she kept walking. When she reached the executive floor, she paused. The doors to the boardroom were closed, but she could hear voices inside. Muffled, low, dangerous. She leaned closer, her heart pounding. "He can't be allowed to interfere," one voice hissed. "Not until Richard steps down," another replied. Her breath caught. They weren't just after Adrian's embarrassment. They wanted him gone. She backed away quickly, the wheels of her cart squeaking against the polished floor. She knew she shouldn't have listened. But now she knew too much. And she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep it to herself. That night, Adrian walked through the glass doors of Cole Enterprises, his steps echoing in the empty lobby. His eyes were sharp, his mind restless. He wanted answers. And he had a strange feeling the janitor, the girl who kissed him, held more of them than anyone else. What would you do if you were Joyce? Would you stay silent and protect your job, or would you risk everything to expose the truth? Write your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear from you. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Adrian Cole stepped into the 28th floor of Cole Enterprises. His sharp gray suit matched the steel of his eyes, but his mind was restless. Every corridor, every polished corner of the skyscraper felt different now, like shadows had crawled out from the walls since that night at the restaurant. People nodded as he passed, eager to please. "Good morning, Mr. Cole." "Sir, the reports are ready." Their voices sounded hollow. He didn't stop, didn't respond beyond a curt nod. He had learned long ago that most greetings in these halls were masks. At the far end of the corridor he caught a glimpse of Blue, a janitor's uniform bent over a cart. His chest tightened. Joyce Meyer. Her head was lowered, her scarf neatly tied, her hands busy adjusting cleaning supplies. But he knew she felt his presence. She stilled, her shoulders tense. For a moment neither spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy with memory. The kiss, the broken glass, the whispers that still hadn't died. Adrian finally broke it. His voice was firm but quiet. "Come with me." Joyce's head snapped up, her dark eyes wide. She hesitated, glancing around the hallway. A few employees were already watching, their curiosity sharpened like knives. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Now." She swallowed hard, then nodded. Inside his office, the city stretched out through wide glass windows, sunlight pouring in and bouncing against sleek furniture. Adrian stood by the desk, his hands resting on the edge, while Joyce lingered by the door, gripping the handle of her cart as though it could protect her. "Why did you do it?" Adrian asked, his voice steady. Joyce blinked. "I told you, sir. There was something in your glass. And you thought kissing me was the answer?" His words cut, but his tone wasn't as sharp as it might have been days ago. Her cheeks burned. "I didn't think. I had to stop you before you drank. There was no time." Adrian studied her, searching her face for deceit, for some hidden agenda. But all he saw was sincerity. Raw, uncomfortable sincerity. "You understand what people are saying," he muttered. "Yes." Her voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. They say I wanted attention, that I crossed a line, that I should be fired. His eyes narrowed. And did you? Her gaze didn't waver. No. I only wanted to save your life. For the first time in years, Adrian felt something shift in him. Most people lied so smoothly he couldn't tell where the truth began. But Joyce spoke like someone who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. And that unsettled him more than the poison in his glass. Joyce returned to her duties after the meeting, but the weight of stares followed her everywhere. She pushed her cart down the hall, feeling eyes prick her back. A group of interns whispered near the elevator, their giggles sharp as blades. She kissed him, right? Imagine thinking that would save your job. She'll be gone by Friday. Joyce's throat tightened. She kept walking, her eyes fixed ahead. She had survived worse. Hunger, bills piling up, days when she wasn't sure her brother would finish school. But this humiliation was different. This was a spotlight she had never asked for. She ducked into the ladies' restroom, locked herself in a stall, and pressed her forehead against the cool metal. You did the right thing, she whispered to herself. Don't let them break you. But the truth was harder to hold on to when the world around her wanted her silence. Meanwhile, Adrian sat in his office, staring at a file he couldn't focus on. His father's message from the night before still burned in his mind. Handle it. Quietly. Don't embarrass us. But how could he ignore it? He picked up his phone and scrolled through the names of the executives present at the dinner. His finger paused over one. Michael Harris, Chief Financial Officer. He remembered how Michael had been unusually quiet after the glass broke, his eyes darting toward the waiter who slipped out unnoticed. Adrian leaned back, his jaw set. If Joyce was telling the truth, then someone close had tried to kill him. And if his father already knew, then silence wasn't protection. It was complicity. That evening, Joyce left the building later than usual. The sun had already dipped behind the skyline, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep violet. She walked toward the subway, her worn shoes scuffing against the pavement. Her cart had been locked away, her shift over, but her mind was far from calm. Halfway down the block, she felt it. A shadow trailing hers. She quickened her steps. The city was alive with traffic, voices, the hum of neon signs, but beneath it all she heard the steady rhythm of footsteps matching her pace. She glanced back. A man in a dark coat, his face half hidden under a cap. Her heart raced. She ducked into the subway entrance, the air thick with the smell of metal and grease. The crowd swallowed her, but the man followed. Joyce pressed her back against a pillar, her breath sharp. Why? Who would follow her? She was just a janitor. She had nothing except one thing. The truth. And maybe that truth had made her dangerous. Back in his penthouse, Adrian poured himself a glass of water and stared out at the glittering city. He couldn't shake the image of Joyce's trembling hands, her voice insisting she had only wanted to save him. He had lived his whole life surrounded by power, by people who twisted loyalty into profit. But she was different, and he hated that he needed her. That night, Joyce's phone buzzed with a new message. She pulled it from her pocket with shaking hands. Unknown number. Stay quiet, or you'll regret it. Her chest tightened. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the screen until her brother stirred in his sleep beside her. For the first time since the kiss, she realized it wasn't just Adrian's life in danger. It was hers too. The city pulsed with restless energy, but inside Cole Enterprises, silence pressed heavy on the 28th floor. It was late, most offices were dark, and only the soft golden glow from Adrian's office spilled across the hallway. He sat at his desk, papers scattered before him, though his eyes were on none of them. The warning Joyce had given him echoed in his mind. Something was in your glass. Adrian wasn't the type to believe easily. He had grown up suspicious of everyone, even family. But now he was beginning to see cracks in the empire his father built. Cracks someone wanted him blind to. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. And then his office phone rang. "Mr. Cole," the receptionist's voice crackled through the line. "There's a delivery for you." A man dropped it off. Said it was urgent. Adrian frowned. "Send it in." Moments later, a small brown envelope sat on his desk. No name. No return address. Inside, a single photograph. Adrian's stomach tightened. It was him. At the dinner. His glass half raised. The angle made it clear the photo had been taken in secret. And circled in red ink, almost mocking, was the faint powder dissolving at the bottom of the wine. Beneath it, 2 words scrawled in jagged handwriting. "Next time." Adrian's hand clenched around the photo. Whoever had sent this wanted him to know they weren't finished. And suddenly, Joyce Meyer's desperate kiss didn't feel like humiliation anymore. It felt like salvation. Across town, Joyce walked up the narrow stairs to her apartment. The hallway smelled of damp concrete and fried food from the neighbor's kitchen. She pushed open the creaky door and found her younger brother, Daniel, sprawled across their old couch, his textbooks open. "You're late," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "Work ran long," Joyce said softly, setting down her bag. She forced a smile, but her hands trembled as she tucked the phone into her pocket. The message still glared at her. "Stay quiet, or you'll regret it." She stirred a pot of soup on the stove, her mind racing. Should she tell Daniel? No. He was only 16. He already carried too much weight for his age. She couldn't add her fears to his shoulders. But as she ladled soup into bowls, she caught sight of him. His tired eyes, his worn clothes, his determination to study despite it all. He was her reason for enduring long nights of scrubbing floors. Her reason for silence when people mocked her. And now, he was her reason to fight. If someone thought threatening her would make her back down, they didn't understand. She had survived storms before. But this storm was unlike any other. The next morning, Joyce pushed her cleaning cart down the executive hallway, her shoulders tense. Whispers followed her as always, but now something else lurked in the air. Paranoia. She could feel it pressing against her skin. When she reached Adrian's office, the door swung open. "Inside," he said curtly. She hesitated. His tone was clipped, but his eyes burned with something different. Urgency. Now. She stepped in, the door closing behind her. Adrian slapped the photograph on the desk. "Look at this." Joyce froze. Her breath caught as her eyes landed on the glass, the powder circled in red. Her voice came out in a whisper. "So you believe me now?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "Someone wanted me dead." Joyce lifted her chin. "I told you. And if they failed once, they will try again." For a moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the city beyond the glass windows. 2 worlds stood face to face, the billionaire heir and the janitor. Adrian finally exhaled. "Tell me everything you saw." So she did. She told him about the waiter, the strange powder, the hushed voices outside the boardroom, the threats whispered in the hall. Her words poured out, steady and urgent. Adrian listened, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back, folding his arms. "You've put yourself in danger," he said quietly. Her brows furrowed. "Me?" He nodded. "If you heard what you shouldn't have, they'll come after you too. And after last night." He tapped the photograph. "They already know you stopped them." Joyce's chest tightened. She thought of the shadow that had followed her, the text message that chilled her blood. He was right. But what struck her wasn't the danger. It was that he acknowledged it. For the first time since the kiss, Adrian wasn't dismissing her. He was warning her. By evening, the office had emptied, but Adrian and Joyce remained. He paced the length of the room, his mind racing. She stood near the window, staring out at the city lights. Finally, Adrian stopped. "If you stay here, they'll destroy you. If you leave, they'll still find you." Her voice was quiet. "So what do I do?" Adrian hesitated. It wasn't in his nature to trust. But tonight, trust felt less like a choice and more like survival. "You stay close to me," he said firmly, "until I find out who's behind this." Joyce's eyes widened. "Close to you. Do you know what people will say?" "I don't care what they say." His tone was sharp, but underneath it was something else. Fear, disguised as anger. Joyce looked at him for a long moment. She thought of her brother at home, of the shadows that had trailed her, of the message that promised regret. And though every instinct told her to run, she found herself nodding. All right. That night, as Adrian's car carried them away from the office, Joyce stared out the window at the blur of city lights. Her reflection stared back at her, eyes wide, heart pounding. She was a janitor. He was a billionaire heir. Their worlds were never meant to collide. But now their fates were bound. And as the car turned into the dark streets, a second car followed at a distance, its headlights low, its driver unseen. Joyce didn't notice. Adrian didn't notice. But someone else had already marked them both. The hum of the engine filled the silence inside Adrian's car as it cut through the evening traffic. The glass divider between the driver and the back seat was down, but neither Adrian nor Joyce spoke. Joyce sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the blur of city lights rushing past. Her heart hadn't stopped racing since she agreed to stay close to him. Every instinct told her this was madness. She was a janitor. Her world was cleaning supplies and worn-out mops, not luxury sedans and shadowy threats. But she also knew something else. If she walked away now, she might not live to regret it. Adrian leaned back in his seat, his sharp gaze fixed on her. She didn't notice, but he studied the way her hands trembled, the way her jaw was set as if holding back fear. She wasn't a woman looking for attention. She wasn't trying to climb her way into his world. She was just trying to survive. And for reasons he couldn't explain, that truth weighed heavier on him than the photograph on his desk. 2 blocks back, the headlights of a black SUV trailed quietly. The driver kept his distance, never close enough to draw suspicion, never far enough to lose sight of the sedan. His hand drummed against the steering wheel, his eyes locked on the taillights ahead. He didn't need to get close tonight. His orders were simple. Watch. Track. Wait for the right moment. The night was young, and opportunities had a way of revealing themselves. The sedan pulled up outside Adrian's penthouse tower, a tall structure that pierced the night sky like a blade of glass and steel. The doorman stepped forward quickly, bowing his head. "Mr. Cole." Adrian nodded curtly and opened the door. Joyce followed hesitantly, her eyes darting around the glittering lobby. Marble floors reflected the warm golden glow from hanging lamps, and the air smelled faintly of polished wood. Everything was pristine, untouched by the kind of work she did every day. She felt small here, smaller than usual. Adrian led the way to the private elevator. Joyce stepped in beside him, her reflection staring back from the mirrored walls. Her uniform looked dull against the polished silver, her sneakers worn. The doors slid shut, and the elevator began to rise. Adrian finally broke the silence. "How long have you been in New York?" 3 years, Joyce said quietly. "And before that?" "Jamaica. Kingston." He nodded slightly, as if tucking the information away. "And why here?" Joyce hesitated. Because I wanted more. Not for me. For my brother. Adrian's eyes flickered toward her. She didn't elaborate, but he could read the weight behind her words. Sacrifice. Responsibility. Burdens he had never carried because his life had been paved in privilege, whether he wanted it or not. The elevator chimed, interrupting the thought. The doors slid open to reveal his penthouse. Joyce stepped inside and froze. Floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the space in moonlight, the city stretching endlessly below. Modern art hung on the walls, sculptures sat on pedestals, and every surface gleamed as though polished daily. The air felt still, untouched, like the inside of a museum. It was beautiful, but it was also lonely. Adrian tossed his keys onto a sleek black table and loosened his tie. "You'll stay here tonight," he said flatly. "It's safer than going back to Brooklyn." Joyce stiffened. "I can't. My brother." "I'll have someone watch over him," Adrian interrupted. Her eyes widened. "You'd do that." He paused, then nodded once. "If they're watching you, they'll watch him too." "I won't risk it." For the first time, Joyce saw something crack in his hardened demeanor. Concern. Real, uncalculated concern. She lowered her gaze, her throat tight. "Thank you." As the night stretched on, Adrian poured himself a glass of water and sat by the window, staring at the city. Joyce sat across the room, perched on the edge of a couch, her hands folded. The silence between them wasn't heavy now. It was thoughtful. Adrian had spent his life surrounded by people who talked too much, who filled the air with noise to cover their intentions. But Joyce, she spoke only when she needed to. And strangely, he found himself wanting to hear more. "Why didn't you let me drink?" he asked suddenly. Joyce blinked. "Because you would have died." "That's not what I mean." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Why risk your job? Your safety? You could have just looked away." Joyce held his gaze, her voice quiet but steady. "Because I know what it's like to lose someone you love when nobody else cared enough to act. I couldn't just stand there." The words hit Adrian harder than he expected. For a moment, he saw not a janitor but someone who carried grief as deep as his own. He opened his mouth to respond, but then it came. A sound. Soft. Almost imperceptible. The faint scrape of metal against glass. Adrian stiffened. His eyes darted to the far window. Moonlight shimmered against the pane, and in that fleeting second, he caught it. The silhouette of a rope swinging gently in the night air. His chest tightened. Someone was climbing. "Get down!" he barked. Joyce froze, startled. Adrian grabbed her arm and pulled her off the couch just as the glass shattered inward. A masked figure tumbled into the room, shards raining like stars across the marble floor. Joyce gasped. Adrian shoved her behind him. His heart pounded, his instincts sharp. This wasn't just about whispers in boardrooms anymore. The enemy was here. The crash of shattering glass still rang in Joyce's ears as the masked intruder landed on the marble floor, crouched like a predator. Moonlight spilled across his black clothes, a knife glinting in his hand. Joyce's breath caught. She stumbled back against the couch, her hands gripping the cushions. Fear surged through her veins, but underneath it came something else, a spark sharp and urgent. Adrian stood in front of her, his body tense, every muscle coiled. His gray eyes locked on the figure. For the first time in his life, the threat wasn't hidden behind polished boardroom smiles or whispered schemes. It was here, inches away, steel flashing under the city's glow. The intruder straightened slowly, the knife twirling between his fingers. "Didn't expect company tonight," he said, his voice low and muffled through the mask. Adrian's jaw clenched. "Who sent you?" The man chuckled. "Does it matter?" He lunged. Adrian shoved Joyce aside as the knife slashed through the air. The blade caught the sleeve of his shirt, slicing fabric but missing flesh. Adrian staggered back, adrenaline burning through his veins. He wasn't a fighter. He had grown up in luxury, not back alleys. But survival was primal, and right now it screamed through every nerve. Joyce's heart thundered. She scanned the room, her eyes darting across the sleek furniture, the polished tables. No weapons. No protection. Except, she grabbed the heavy crystal vase from the side table. Without thinking, she hurled it with all her strength. It smashed against the intruder's shoulder. He grunted, stumbling sideways, his grip on the knife faltering. "Run!" Adrian barked. But Joyce didn't run. She grabbed another object, this time a metal lamp, and swung. The base connected with the intruder's arm, sending the knife skittering across the floor. Adrian lunged, kicking the blade out of reach. For a split second, relief surged, until the intruder slammed into him, driving them both into the glass coffee table. It shattered beneath their weight, shards biting into Adrian's skin. "Adrian!" Joyce cried. She darted forward, grabbing the man's mask. Her nails clawed at the fabric, pulling it loose just enough to glimpse the eyes beneath. Cold, calculating, familiar in a way that made her stomach twist. The intruder shoved her back with brutal force. Joyce hit the floor, the breath knocked out of her. Adrian gritted his teeth, adrenaline surging. With a sharp twist, he threw the man off him, staggering to his feet. His arms were bleeding, his suit torn, but his focus was razor-sharp now. "You picked the wrong night," Adrian growled. The intruder smirked behind the torn mask. "This is just the beginning." And then, before Adrian or Joyce could react, he vaulted through the shattered window, disappearing into the night like a shadow. The silence that followed was deafening. Only their ragged breaths filled the space, mixing with the faint hum of the city beyond the broken glass. Joyce pushed herself up slowly, her chest aching. She stared at Adrian, who stood amid the wreckage, blood streaking his arm, his chest heaving. "You're hurt," she whispered, moving toward him. He shook his head. "I'm fine." His voice was tight, but his eyes betrayed the storm inside. He wasn't fine. He had nearly been killed. Again. Joyce reached for his arm, ignoring his protest. She tore a strip from her scarf and wrapped it firmly around the cut. Her hands were steady despite the tremor in her body. Adrian watched her in silence, his jaw tightening. This woman, this janitor, had just saved his life. Again. And for the first time, he realized she wasn't in his world by accident. She was in it because she was meant to be. Minutes later, security burst into the penthouse. Guns raised, voices urgent. They froze at the sight of the shattered window, the wreckage, the blood. "Mr. Cole, what happened?" Adrian's voice was cold, commanding. "Lock down the building. No one comes in or out. And find out how someone scaled a 40-story tower without being seen." The guards exchanged uneasy glances but obeyed quickly. Joyce stood back, her pulse still racing, her scarf stained with Adrian's blood. She knew what this meant. Whoever was behind this wasn't content with whispers or warnings anymore. They wanted him dead. And now, by saving him twice, she had painted a target on herself too. When the guards finally cleared the room, Adrian turned to her. His gray eyes burned with something fierce, something unshakable. "You stay close to me," he said again, his voice low but firm. "From this moment forward, you don't go anywhere alone. Do you understand?" Joyce swallowed hard. She thought of her brother, of her job, of the fragile life she had fought to build. Every piece of it was now at risk. But she also thought of the knife, the glass, the shadow slipping into the night. She nodded. "I understand." Adrian stepped closer. his presence overwhelming but steady. Good. Because whoever is behind this, they won't stop until one of us is gone. Joyce's chest tightened. His words weren't just a warning. They were a promise. And as the city lights flickered beyond the broken glass, she knew this was only the beginning. Morning light spilled into the penthouse, soft and golden, catching the jagged edges of broken glass that still clung to the floor. The window had been boarded temporarily, but the wound in the skyline mirrored the wound inside Adrian Cole's mind. He stood in the kitchen, his shirt sleeves rolled, a fresh bandage wrapped around his arm. The news played quietly from a wall-mounted television, reports of market trends, politics, a subway delay. Not a word about the intruder who had shattered his home. Of course not. Cole's security made sure of that. The family name could not bleed in public. Adrian sipped his coffee but tasted nothing. His gray eyes flicked toward the couch where Joyce sat, her scarf neatly tied, her posture straight despite the exhaustion that shadowed her face. She had refused to sleep. Even after the chaos, even after he insisted she take the guest room, she had sat awake, watching the door like a soldier keeping guard. Coffee? Adrian asked. Joyce shook her head. I don't drink it. Keeps me up. He almost laughed. You couldn't have slept anyway. Her lips twitched, but she said nothing. The elevator chimed, and two men entered the penthouse. Cole Enterprises security, both in dark suits. They bowed their heads slightly to Adrian. Mr. Cole, we reviewed the footage from last night. One began. Adrian's jaw tightened. And the guard hesitated. There's nothing. No record of anyone entering the building. No sign of anyone scaling the walls. Joyce frowned. That's not possible. I saw him. The second guard shrugged. Our cameras didn't. Adrian's eyes narrowed. He knew what that meant. Someone inside had tampered with the footage. Someone powerful enough to erase evidence. Leave us, Adrian said coldly. The guards exchanged uneasy glances but obeyed. When the door closed, Joyce leaned forward. They're covering it up. Adrian nodded slowly. Yes. And not just the intruder. Someone on the inside made sure the cameras went dark. Her voice dropped. Then it's someone close. Someone in Cole Enterprises. Adrian's chest tightened. He thought of the faces at the boardroom table, the smiles that hid daggers. He had always assumed their greed stopped at money. Now he knew better. He paced to the window, staring out at the city. Who benefits if I'm gone? He muttered to himself. Joyce stood, her voice firm. The ones who want your father's empire. If you die, you can't inherit. If your father steps down, someone else takes control. Adrian turned, studying her. Her words were sharp, logical. Not the words of a janitor, but of someone who had seen the world strip people bare and learned to read what lay underneath. You're not just observant, he said slowly. You understand power. Joyce shrugged lightly. I've watched people like them my whole life. Different country, same game. For a moment, silence stretched. Adrian felt something strange then, not just respect but reliance. He had grown up surrounded by advisors, lawyers, consultants. But none of them had risked their life for him. None of them saw the truth the way she did. A buzz from his desk broke the silence. Adrian crossed the room and picked up the phone. Mr. Cole, his assistant's voice came through, tight and urgent. You should know, Michael Harris has just filed a motion with the board. He's calling for an emergency vote to restructure leadership. Adrian's grip tightened on the receiver. Michael Harris, the CFO. The same man who had been too quiet at the dinner. The same man whose eyes had darted toward the waiter. When? Adrian asked. This afternoon. Adrian slammed the phone down. His chest burned with fury. Michael wasn't waiting for Richard Cole to step aside. He was making his move now. Joyce stepped closer. He's behind it, isn't he? Adrian's jaw clenched. Maybe. But if I accuse him without proof, the board will turn against me. I need evidence. Joyce hesitated, then asked quietly, "And what if we find it?" Adrian met her gaze, his voice low. "Then I destroy him." The hours that followed blurred. Adrian made calls, gathered files, scanned through financial reports, searching for cracks in Michael Harris's fortress. Joyce sat nearby, her sharp eyes catching details he might have missed. Irregular payments, shell accounts, connections that didn't line up. She wasn't trained for this work, but her instinct was unshakable. She noticed patterns, gaps, shadows in numbers that should have been whole. By noon, Adrian leaned back, his eyes bloodshot from the screen. He's been siphoning money. Millions. But it's buried deep. Too deep. Joyce bit her lip. So we need someone closer to him. Someone who knows his secrets. Adrian frowned. Like who? Before she could answer, the phone rang again. He picked it up, irritation sharp in his voice. What? But the voice on the other end froze him in place. You're wasting time, Adrian, the caller drawled. You won't make it to the board meeting. Not alive, anyway. The line went dead. Adrian lowered the phone slowly, his pulse thundering. Joyce's eyes widened. Who was it? He looked at her, his expression grim. Michael Harris. The clock ticked toward the afternoon, each second heavier than the last. Adrian knew he couldn't back down. If he didn't show up at the meeting, Harris would seize control. If he did show up, he might not walk out alive. Joyce stepped beside him, her hand brushing against his sleeve. Then we go together. He turned sharply. No. You're already a target. I won't risk it. But she shook her head, her voice fierce. You don't have a choice. You need me. I see what you can't. Adrian stared at her, his chest tightening. He hated to admit it, but she was right. He exhaled slowly. Then we walk into hell together. That afternoon, Adrian Cole and Joyce Meyer entered the glass doors of Cole Enterprises. The lobby buzzed with energy, employees bustling, screens flashing market updates, the hum of power thick in the air. But beneath it all lay something darker. Eyes followed them as they crossed the marble floor, whispers rising like smoke. Is that her? The janitor. She's with him now. What's happening? Joyce kept her chin high, though her heart pounded. Adrian pushed through the stairs, his presence commanding. But as the elevator doors closed, his mind churned. Harris had made his move. And if the call was true, then by the end of the day, Adrian Cole might be dead. The elevator doors slid open onto the 35th floor, home to the Cole Enterprises boardroom. A corridor of polished walnut and glass stretched ahead, lined with portraits of past CEOs. Their gazes seemed to follow Adrian and Joyce as they walked, stern reminders of the legacy at stake. Adrian's footsteps were steady, but inside, his pulse raced. Every instinct screamed that he was walking into danger. The call still echoed in his mind. You won't make it out alive. Joyce walked a step behind him, her hands clasped tightly, her heart thudding against her ribs. She had scrubbed these floors countless times, invisible to the people now waiting in that boardroom. Today, she was walking in beside the heir to the empire. And for the first time, she wasn't invisible. They reached the door. Adrian paused, glancing at her. Once we're inside, stay near the wall. Watch. Listen. If anything feels off, tell me. Joyce nodded. Got it. He took a breath and pushed the door open. The boardroom was a cathedral of power. Long mahogany table, leather chairs, panoramic views of the Manhattan skyline. The city glittered beyond the glass, but inside the room, the air was cold, heavy with calculation. Every seat was filled. Faces turned toward Adrian as he entered. Some polite, some hostile, some carefully blank. At the head of the table sat Michael Harris, the CFO, his silver hair slicked back, his lips curved into a thin, practiced smile. "Adrian," he said smoothly, rising to his feet. "We were just discussing you." Adrian closed the door behind him, his expression unreadable. "I'm sure you were." Harris gestured to the chair opposite him. "Please, join us." Adrian didn't sit. Instead, he remained standing at the far end of the table, his hands clasped behind his back. "I hear there's a motion to restructure leadership." Harris's smile didn't falter. "Yes. With your father's health declining and your recent instability, the board feels the company needs stronger, steadier leadership." Joyce felt her stomach twist. Instability? The man had nearly been killed twice in a week, and now they were twisting it against him. Adrian's eyes narrowed. "And I assume you mean yourself." Harris spread his hands modestly. "If the board decides I'm the best choice, I would serve, yes." The room murmured in agreement. Adrian scanned their faces. Men and women he had known for years, people who had dined at his family's table, people who had smiled at him since childhood. And yet now their eyes slid away from his. Loyalty was a currency, and someone had paid them well. "Before we proceed," Adrian said, his voice steady, "I have a question. How many of you knew about the attempt on my life?" The room went silent. Harris's smile faltered slightly. "Attempt on your life? Adrian, you're being dramatic." "Dramatic?" Adrian's voice sharpened. "A man broke into my home last night. Armed. He tried to kill me. And the security footage was wiped. That doesn't happen without help from the inside." Whispers rippled around the table. Harris's jaw tightened. "These are serious accusations. Do you have proof?" Adrian didn't flinch. "Not yet. But I will." Harris's mask cracked, just for a moment, before he composed himself again. "Then until you do, I suggest we continue with business." Joyce shifted near the wall, her eyes scanning the room. Something didn't feel right. 2 security guards stood near the exit. Men she had never seen before. Their posture wasn't that of typical corporate security. It was sharper, military, predatory. Her stomach sank. This wasn't just a meeting. It was a setup. Harris cleared his throat. "Motion to vote. All in favor of leadership restructuring, signify now." Hands began to rise, one after another. Adrian's chest tightened. He was watching his inheritance, his father's legacy, slip through his fingers in real time. But before the vote could finish, Joyce's voice cut through the tension. "Wait." Every head turned. Harris's expression twisted in irritation. "This meeting is for board members only." Joyce stepped forward, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "I'm aware. But I also know something you might want to hear before you vote." Harris scoffed. "And what could a janitor possibly know?" She met his gaze unflinching. "I know that 2 days ago, a $10 million transfer left a Coal Enterprises subsidiary and landed in an offshore account linked to a shell company you control. I also know that same company owns a private security firm, one that employs men like the 2 standing at that door." The room erupted into chaos. Harris's face went pale. "This is absurd." "I printed the records," Joyce interrupted, pulling a folded document from her bag. "They're on Adrian's desk." Every eye in the room swung toward Harris. The board members murmured, alarmed now, afraid. Adrian felt something inside him shift. It wasn't just vindication, it was power. For the first time, Harris wasn't in control. But Harris wasn't finished. His polite facade cracked completely as he slammed his hands on the table. You think you can stop this? You think anyone will believe the word of a janitor over me? Adrian stepped forward, his voice cold as steel. They don't have to. The paper trail speaks louder than any of us. Harris's eyes darkened. And then, almost casually, he nodded toward the two men by the door. The guards moved. They weren't heading for Adrian. They were heading for Joyce. The room exploded into shouts as the men advanced. Joyce stumbled back, her heart hammering. One reached for her arm, but Adrian was faster. He grabbed the nearest chair and swung it, smashing it against the man's shoulder. Get out! Adrian roared to the board members. Now! Panic erupted. Chairs scraped. Papers flew. The room became chaos. Harris slipped toward the exit, but Adrian lunged, grabbing him by the collar. It's over, he hissed. Harris sneered. Not even close. And with a sudden jerk, he broke free and bolted for the hallway. Adrian! Joyce shouted, dodging the second guard's grasp. He's running. Adrian turned and sprinted after Harris, his pulse thundering. This wasn't about a company anymore. It wasn't about a vote. This was war. The glass doors of the boardroom burst open as Michael Harris sprinted down the corridor, his polished shoes pounding against the marble floor. His face was twisted, no longer composed, no longer hiding. Rage and desperation had stripped away his mask. Stop him! Adrian shouted, bolting after him. His blood roared in his ears. Joyce followed close behind, her breath ragged, her heart hammering. Executives scattered out of their way, papers flying as panic rippled through the hall. Harris shoved through the crowd, his eyes darting toward the emergency stairwell. He flung the door open and disappeared inside. Adrian slammed into the stairwell a second later, taking the steps two at a time. The sound of footsteps echoed above, Harris climbing fast, but Adrian's fury pushed him higher. Joyce followed, clutching the railing, her legs burning. She had never imagined herself running through a skyscraper chasing a man who wanted them both dead. But here she was, and she wasn't about to stop. By the time they reached the rooftop, the city spread out before them in glittering sprawl. The wind whipped hard, tugging at Joyce's scarf, filling the air with the sharp tang of steel and rain. Harris stood near the edge, his chest heaving, his phone clutched tightly in one hand. It's over, Harris. Adrian shouted, stepping forward. Harris laughed breathlessly. You really think this ends with me? You have no idea how deep this goes. Joyce's stomach sank. She believed him. Give me the phone, Adrian demanded. Harris smirked. You're not ready for what's on it. Before Adrian could move, headlights flared on the street far below. A black SUV pulled up, its doors swinging open. Harris's smirk widened. My ride's here. He raised his phone, typed something quickly, and then, without warning, hurled it across the rooftop. It clattered against the concrete, skidding to a stop near Joyce's feet. Keep it, Harris spat. It won't save you. Then he vaulted over the edge. Joyce gasped and ran forward, but when she looked down, her eyes widened in shock. Harris hadn't jumped to his death. He had landed in the bed of a waiting truck. Within seconds, the vehicle screeched away, swallowed by the chaos of city traffic. Adrian cursed, his fists clenched. He's gone. Joyce bent down and picked up the phone, her fingers trembling. The screen was cracked but still glowing. A list of encrypted messages filled it, names and numbers hidden behind code. Her breath caught. Adrian. He wasn't lying. There's more. There's a whole network. Adrian took the phone from her, his gray eyes scanning the screen. His jaw tightened. He didn't recognize the numbers, but one name stood out. It wasn't Harris. It was someone much closer. Richard Cole. His father. Adrian's chest constricted, his throat dry. His mind screamed that it couldn't be true. His father might have been cold, controlling, ruthless, but a traitor? An ally to the man trying to kill his own son? The thought sliced deeper than any knife. Joyce stepped closer, her voice low. Adrian, what is it? He lowered the phone slowly, his expression shadowed, unreadable. My father's name is on this list. Joyce froze. What? That doesn't make sense. But Adrian's eyes told her everything. Sense or not, the truth was staring them in the face. The enemy wasn't just outside anymore. The enemy was inside his family. The city lights below flickered like a sea of restless fire, but on the rooftop, silence pressed heavy between Adrian and Joyce. The cracked phone screen glowed faintly in Adrian's hand, his father's name still staring back at him like a wound. Richard Cole. Adrian's throat tightened. He wanted to believe it was a mistake, a coincidence, a setup. But deep down he knew better. His father's reach was vast. Too vast for his name to appear here by accident. Joyce studied his face, the way his jaw clenched, the storm in his gray eyes. She had seen people break under less. But Adrian didn't break. He hardened. And that frightened her even more. Adrian, she said softly, stepping closer. You can't ignore it. His voice came out low, strained. You think my father wants me dead? Joyce held his gaze. I think someone powerful does. And if his name is here, you have to ask why. He looked away, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the phone. Memories rushed through him. His father's commands, his cold approval, his endless criticism. Richard Cole had never been warm, but he had been unshakable. A giant in Adrian's life. Could that same giant be the one pulling the strings to destroy him? Adrian exhaled sharply, forcing the thought down. I won't believe it. Not until I see proof. Joyce didn't push further. She knew denial when she heard it. But she also knew the truth had a way of surfacing, whether people were ready or not. They returned to the penthouse, the city's midnight hum wrapping around them like a warning. Adrian set the phone on the table, its cracked screen casting faint light across the room. We need to break into these messages, he muttered. There's a code. Harris wouldn't have risked carrying this unless it was important. Joyce sat beside him, scanning the strange symbols and encrypted names. Her brow furrowed. Look at this, she said, pointing to a repeating string of numbers. Their dates. Meetings. Hidden under code. Adrian leaned closer. She was right. Embedded in the messages were patterns, times, and locations disguised as random digits. And one stood out. Tomorrow night. 10 p.m. Cole Enterprises. Adrian's blood ran cold. They're meeting inside the building. Joyce's heart lurched. Then we have to be there. He shook his head. It's too dangerous. Her eyes narrowed. It's more dangerous not to. If we don't go, they win. They'll take everything and maybe your life. He looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who had started as invisible, who had kissed him in desperation to save him, who now sat across from him refusing to back down. Adrian had spent his life surrounded by cowards in expensive suits. Joyce was the only one who had the courage to face the truth head-on. Finally, he nodded. All right. We go. The decision hung in the air like a promise. Adrian leaned back, rubbing his temples. If my father's involved. His voice faltered for the first time. If he's part of this. Joyce reached across the table, her hand brushing his. Her touch was steady, grounding. Then you'll face it. With proof. Not just suspicion. His eyes met hers. For the first time in days, the tightness in his chest eased, if only slightly. But before either could speak again, Adrian's phone buzzed sharply. Not Harris's. His own. He picked it up. A new message flashed across the screen. Richard Cole. Tomorrow. My office. 9 a.m. alone. Adrian's breath caught. His father never summoned him like this. Not at this hour, not with such urgency. Joyce's pulse quickened. He knows. Adrian's jaw tightened, his decision already made. Then I confront him. Tomorrow morning. Joyce shook her head. What if it's a trap? Adrian's gray eyes darkened. Then I walk into it. Because if Richard Cole wants me gone, I need to hear it from his mouth. The room went silent, the city lights flickering beyond the glass. For the first time, Adrian Cole wasn't just fighting his enemies. He was preparing to face his father. The morning sun had barely broken over the skyline when Adrian Cole stepped out of the elevator onto the top floor of Cole Enterprises. The hall was quiet, lined with oil paintings of ships and steel mills, the foundation of his family's empire. But today, the air felt colder, heavier, as though the walls themselves were holding secrets. Richard Cole's office stood at the end of the corridor, its heavy oak doors closed. Adrian paused in front of them, his reflection staring back in the polished brass handles. He straightened his tie, drew a steady breath, and knocked once. Enter, came the voice from inside. Deep, commanding, unyielding. Adrian pushed the doors open. Richard Cole sat behind his massive desk, a wall of glass behind him spilling golden morning light across the room. The man was a pillar, tall even when seated, shoulders broad despite his age, his hair silver at the temples. His sharp blue eyes pierced across the desk, weighing, measuring, dissecting. Sit, Richard said, gesturing to the leather chair across from him. Adrian didn't sit. He closed the doors behind him and stood tall. You wanted to see me. Richard's brow arched slightly. Still dramatic, I see. Sit. Adrian hesitated, then finally lowered himself into the chair. The leather was cool beneath him, the weight of his father's gaze heavier still. Richard steepled his fingers. Word travels fast. I hear there was chaos in the boardroom yesterday. Adrian's jaw tightened. Michael Harris tried to seize the company. He's been siphoning millions through offshore accounts. And he's tied to an attempt on my life. Richard didn't flinch. He leaned back slightly, as though the information were trivial. Harris is ambitious. Too ambitious. But useful men often are. Adrian's stomach twisted. Useful. He tried to kill me. Richard's eyes narrowed. And yet you're sitting here alive. Perhaps you should thank him for keeping you alert. Adrian's hands curled into fists. Are you saying you knew? Silence hung between them. Richard's gaze was steady, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke. Nothing happens in this company without my knowledge. Adrian's chest tightened. The words were like a blade. You let him try. Adrian demanded, his voice rising. Richard's tone remained calm, almost bored. I allowed him to test you, to see if you were strong enough to survive in this world. Power is not inherited, Adrian. It's proven. If a single attempt on your life breaks you, you don't deserve Cole Enterprises. Adrian's breath caught. Rage and disbelief collided in his chest. You put me through this, just to test me? Richard's eyes sharpened. I put you through this because one day you'll sit in this chair. And when that day comes, weakness will kill you faster than any assassin. Adrian slammed his hands on the desk, his gray eyes blazing. You call that leadership? You call that family? You don't protect your son by throwing him to wolves. Richard leaned forward, his voice low, cutting like steel. I don't protect my son. I prepare my heir. The silence that followed was suffocating. Adrian's chest heaved, his heart pounding. 4 years he had lived in his father's shadow, desperate for approval, desperate to prove himself. And now the truth sat in front of him. Richard Cole didn't love him. He was testing him like a pawn. Adrian stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. If you think I'll accept this, you don't know me at all. Richard's expression didn't change. On the contrary, he said coolly, I know you better than you know yourself. Adrian turned sharply and stormed toward the door. His hand gripped the handle, but his father's voice stopped him cold. Harris was only the beginning, Richard said calmly. Others are coming. Stronger. Smarter. If you survive them, then perhaps you're worthy. If not, he shrugged lightly. Then you were never meant to lead. Adrian froze, his knuckles white against the brass handle. He didn't turn back. He couldn't. He yanked the door open and stepped into the hall, his chest burning, his mind a storm. At the far end of the corridor, Joyce stood waiting. She had insisted on coming with him, though she'd stayed out of sight. The moment she saw his face, ashen, tense, raw, her stomach sank. What happened? She whispered. Adrian shook his head, his voice rough. He knew. He knew everything. Joyce's eyes widened. And Adrian looked at her, his expression hollow. He let it happen. To test me. Her breath caught. Your own father. Not father, Adrian snapped, his voice sharp with pain. Not anymore. The words hung between them, heavy and final. They rode the elevator down in silence, the hum of the cables the only sound. Joyce's heart ached at the storm brewing inside him. She wanted to say something, anything, but she knew words wouldn't heal this. Adrian's fists clenched at his sides. For the first time, he wasn't just fighting Harris or faceless enemies in the shadows. He was fighting Richard Cole. And if he wanted to survive, he'd have to stop being his father's heir. He'd have to become his own man. The black sedan carried Adrian and Joyce back to his penthouse in silence. The city outside bustled with its usual rhythm. Horns blaring, people rushing, skyscrapers glowing like sentinels. But inside the car, the air was heavy, suffocating. Adrian sat rigid, his hands clenched on his knees, his gray eyes fixed on the blur of lights outside the window. Every word from Richard still burned in his ears. I don't protect my son. I prepare my heir. Joyce sat beside him, watching his reflection in the glass. His jaw was tight, his expression carved from stone. But she could see the cracks, the pain beneath the anger, the betrayal eating at him. She reached for his arm, hesitated, then spoke softly. You're not him, Adrian. He turned to her sharply. Aren't I? He made me. Every decision, every path, I've lived under his hand. And now he's telling me I was nothing but an experiment. Joyce's voice was steady, calm against his storm. That doesn't make you him. That makes you the one who chooses differently. Adrian's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, but her words cut through the rage like light through smoke. He exhaled sharply, leaning back against the seat. You don't understand, he muttered. You've never lived with a man like him. Joyce's gaze hardened. Maybe not him. But I grew up with people who thought they owned me. Men who thought I should bow because I was poor, because I was a girl, because my place was at the bottom. I survived them by refusing to believe they were right. Her voice softened, but her eyes stayed firm. You survive him the same way. Adrian stared at her, silent, but something inside shifted. For years he had been weighed down by Richard's definition of strength. Joyce had just given him another one. Back at the penthouse, the phone Harris had thrown still sat on the table, its cracked screen dim but alive. Adrian picked it up, scrolling through the messages again. Joyce leaned over his shoulder. "The meeting," she said. "Tomorrow night. 10 o'clock. Right here, in your father's building." Adrian's lips pressed into a thin line. "They'll be planning their next move." Joyce folded her arms. "Then we need to be there." He shook his head. "It could be a trap." "It probably is," she replied bluntly. "But if we don't go, we'll never know who's behind this. And we'll never have proof." Adrian studied her. She wasn't reckless. Her eyes were too clear for that. She was terrified, but she was also resolute. And that resolve anchored him in a way nothing else had. Finally, he nodded. "Then we go. Together." Joyce released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. They spent the rest of the evening planning. Joyce gathered what little she thought they might need. Dark clothes, comfortable shoes, her scarf tied tighter than usual. Adrian called in a single loyal guard, a man his father hadn't bought, to position outside the penthouse and watch over Joyce's younger brother in Brooklyn. By midnight, the city was quieter, the traffic thinning, the skyscrapers glowing like watchful eyes. Adrian stood by the window, his reflection staring back at him. He had never felt less like Richard's heir and more like his own man. Joyce joined him, her scarf catching the faint glow of the city lights. She looked at him, her voice quiet but fierce. "If you go in there as his son, they'll break you. Go in there as yourself, the man who doesn't need his father to define him." Adrian held her gaze, and for the first time that day the storm inside him steadied. He turned back to the window, the city stretching before them like a battlefield. "Tomorrow night," he said firmly. "We end this." The city was cloaked in midnight silence when Adrian's car rolled to a stop a block from Cole Enterprises. The skyscraper loomed above them, its mirrored windows reflecting the faint glow of street lamps. At this hour the lobby was empty, the building seemingly asleep. But Adrian knew better. Somewhere inside, the real power brokers of his father's empire were gathering. He turned to Joyce. She was dressed in dark clothes, her scarf tucked tightly around her hair, her eyes sharp with determination. She looked nothing like the janitor who had once blended into these halls. Tonight, she looked like someone who belonged in a fight. "You don't have to do this," Adrian murmured. Her gaze was steady. "Yes, I do. You need eyes that see what you miss. And I need to know the truth as much as you." Adrian nodded, his chest tightening with something he couldn't name. "Stay close to me." They slipped out of the car and into the shadows. Getting in wasn't easy. The front lobby cameras would catch them instantly, so they circled to the service entrance, the very door Joyce had used hundreds of times before. She swiped her old ID badge. Miraculously, the light flicked green. She gave Adrian a small, tight smile. "Guess they forgot about the janitors when they wiped your security." They slipped inside. The corridors smelled faintly of wax and cleaning agents, a familiar comfort to Joyce. But tonight, every shadow felt alive, every creak of the floor a threat. They moved quickly, climbing stairwells, avoiding cameras where they could. Joyce led the way, her memory of the building's service routes sharper than any map. By the time they reached the executive floor, faint voices drifted through the air. Low, deliberate, dangerous. Adrian pressed a finger to his lips. Together, they edged toward the boardroom. Through the crack in the double doors, they saw them. Half a dozen men and women sat around the polished table, their faces lit by the glow of a single lamp. At the head sat Michael Harris, his expression smug. Beside him, two board members Adrian had once thought loyal. And farther down, Adrian's stomach twisted. His father's chief of staff, a man who had practically raised him when Richard was too busy. They were all there, plotting. Harris's voice carried clearly. The heir is weak. The board saw it yesterday. He doesn't have his father's ruthlessness, which means he won't survive long enough to inherit. One of the women leaned forward. And Richard. Harris smirked. Richard understands. He's preparing for the inevitable. Once Adrian's out of the way, the empire shifts seamlessly. Our hands stay clean. Adrian's chest constricted. His father wasn't just testing him. He was complicit. Joyce pressed a hand to his arm, steadying him. His fists had clenched, his jaw set, his body trembling with rage. She shook her head, whispering, "Not yet. Listen." Another voice spoke, deep and rough. Adrian froze. It was his father's chief of staff. "The boy's tougher than you think. Twice now he's escaped death." Harris leaned back in his chair, unconcerned. "Then the third time we make sure he doesn't. Tomorrow's deal with the Saudis will keep him occupied. That's when we move." Adrian's breath caught. Tomorrow. They were planning his death tomorrow. Joyce's heart raced. She wanted to drag him out to run, but Adrian shook his head. He needed more. He needed names, proof, the full picture. One of the board members asked, "And the girl?" Joyce's stomach dropped. Harris smirked. "The janitor. She's nothing. But she knows too much. Take care of her when the time comes." Joyce's hand trembled against Adrian's arm. He covered it quickly, squeezing gently, a silent vow. "I won't let them touch you." For a moment, silence hung over the table. Then Harris stood. "Enough talk. Tomorrow, the coal name changes hands. Permanently." He reached for a folder on the table and flipped it open. Adrian leaned closer to see what was inside. But his foot brushed against the door. It creaked. Every head at the table snapped toward it. Adrian froze. Joyce's breath hitched. "Someone's here," Harris hissed. Chairs scraped back. Heavy footsteps pounded toward the doors. Adrian grabbed Joyce's hand. "Run." The doors burst open, light flooding the corridor. And for the first time, Adrian and Joyce were no longer ghosts in the shadows. They were prey in plain sight. The moment the boardroom doors burst open, the night exploded into chaos. "Stop them!" Harris shouted, his voice echoing down the corridor. Adrian yanked Joyce's hand, pulling her into a sprint. Their footsteps hammered against the polished floor as shouts and footsteps followed close behind. They darted down the hall, past portraits of men who had built the empire now trying to destroy them. Joyce's scarf snagged briefly on a door handle, but she ripped it free, adrenaline burning through her veins. "This way," Adrian hissed, pulling her toward the stairwell. They slammed through the heavy door, the metallic clang reverberating as they bolted down the steps. Behind them, the pounding of boots grew louder. Joyce's lungs burned, but she didn't slow. Every instinct screamed at her to keep moving. Adrian's grip was iron, pulling her with him, steady even as his own breath came hard and fast. At the 20th floor, he shoved open another door. They spilled into a dim corridor lined with darkened offices. "Hide," Adrian whispered urgently. They ducked into an office just as two men rushed past, their flashlights slicing through the shadows. Joyce crouched behind a desk, her chest rising and falling like a drum. Adrian pressed close beside her, his gray eyes scanning the room. For a moment, silence returned. Then crack. The office door flew open. A guard stepped inside, his flashlight sweeping across the room. Joyce froze, every muscle screaming not to move. The beam crept closer, closer, until Adrian grabbed a paperweight from the desk and hurled it across the room. It clattered against the far wall. The guard spun, his light following the sound. "Go!" Adrian whispered sharply. They bolted through the side door, their escape masked by the noise. By the time they reached the lobby, sweat soaked Adrian's shirt, and Joyce's legs felt like lead. But freedom was so close she could taste it. The glass doors glowed ahead, the streetlights beyond them promising escape. But two guards stood in their path. "Back!" Adrian hissed, dragging Joyce behind a column. His mind raced. If they were caught now, it was over. Joyce's eyes darted across the lobby. Then she whispered, "The janitor's tunnel." Adrian frowned. "What?" She pointed. "Basement level. Service corridor. It leads out to the alley." Adrian nodded sharply. "Show me." They dashed toward the stairwell, slipping inside just as the guards' voices echoed across the marble. Down, down, down into the bowels of the skyscraper. The air grew cooler, the lights dimmer, the silence heavier. Joyce's memory guided them through narrow corridors, past storage rooms and boiler doors. At last, she stopped before a metal exit door streaked with rust. "Here." Adrian shoved it open. The night air hit them like a wave, damp and sharp. They stumbled into the alley, the city's hum rising around them. For the first time, the skyscraper loomed behind them instead of over them. They had escaped. But not cleanly. Because as Adrian turned to pull the door closed, his eyes caught a shadow in the alley. A figure leaned casually against the wall, watching. Not Harris. Not a guard. Someone else. Someone Adrian recognized. His blood ran cold. The figure stepped into the glow of the streetlight, a smile curving across his lips. "It's been a long time, Adrian." Adrian's breath caught. The last person he ever expected to see here was standing before him. Someone from his past. Someone who knew him better than anyone. And someone who clearly wasn't on his side anymore. The danger wasn't over. It was just beginning. What would you do if you discovered your own family and closest allies were plotting against you? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and share your thoughts. I'm reading every single one. The alley was narrow, the hum of the city muffled by towering brick walls. A single flickering street lamp cast long shadows, stretching the figure's smile into something cruel. Adrian's stomach twisted. He knew that face. He had grown up with it. "Daniel," Adrian said, his voice sharp, disbelieving. Daniel Pierce stepped forward, his expensive suit immaculate even in the grime of the alley. His blonde hair was slicked back, his blue eyes gleaming with something Adrian hadn't seen in years, ambition laced with venom. "Adrian Cole," Daniel said smoothly. "Still chasing after Daddy's approval, I see." Adrian's jaw tightened. Memories rushed back. Boarding school in Switzerland, late nights at Harvard, countless business deals where Daniel had stood at his side like a brother. They had been inseparable once. Until Daniel disappeared overseas, leaving only rumors of betrayal in his wake. "What are you doing here?" Adrian demanded. Daniel chuckled, slow and mocking. "What I've always done. Positioning myself where the power flows." Joyce stepped forward, her dark eyes locked on Daniel. "You're part of this." Daniel smirked at her, his gaze lingering with a cold curiosity. "And you must be the janitor. The one who's been kissing life into our golden boy." Adrian's fists clenched, fury blazing in his chest. "Don't you dare talk to her like that." Daniel raised his hands in mock surrender. "Relax, old friend. I mean no disrespect. She's impressive, really. To crawl from the bottom and somehow stand beside you. But the higher she climbs, the harder she'll fall." Joyce held his gaze unflinching. "I've been falling my whole life. It doesn't scare me anymore." Daniel's smile faded, just for a second. Adrian stepped forward, closing the distance. His voice was low, dangerous. Why, Daniel? Why stand with Harris? Why stand with my father? Daniel's expression hardened. Because your father offered me something you never could. A place at the table. Not as an heir but as an equal. Do you know how long I've waited for that? Do you know what it's like to spend years in your shadow? Always the sidekick, never the chosen one. Adrian's chest tightened. So you sold me out. Daniel's eyes gleamed. I didn't sell you out, Adrian. I simply stopped waiting for you to hand me scraps. Harris sees my worth. Your father sees my worth. You never did. Adrian's rage boiled over. He lunged, slamming Daniel against the brick wall. You think worth comes from stabbing people in the back? You think it makes you strong? Daniel didn't flinch. He leaned closer, his voice a whisper. It makes me survive. And tomorrow when you're gone, I'll be sitting where you should have been. Adrian's hand tightened on his collar, fury screaming in his veins. He wanted to end it right there, to silence him forever. But Joyce's hand gripped his arm, firm and steady. Adrian, she said, her voice urgent. Don't. That's what he wants. He wants you to lose control. If you kill him now, you'll prove them right. Adrian froze. Daniel's smug face inches from his own. Every muscle screamed to strike. But Joyce's words cut deeper than Daniel's taunts. Slowly, Adrian released him. Daniel straightened his jacket, smirking. Still soft. Still the boy who can't finish what he starts. Joyce stepped in front of Adrian, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. No. He's not soft. He's smart enough not to play your game. For the first time, Daniel's smirk faltered. The tension hung heavy, the air electric. Then Daniel leaned in, his voice cold. Tomorrow night. The deal with the Saudis. That's when it happens. You won't see it coming. And with that, he stepped back into the shadows, disappearing into the night. Adrian stood frozen, his chest heaving, his fists trembling. Joyce turned to him, her voice low but firm. You can't fight this with anger, Adrian. You have to fight it with truth. With proof. That's the only way you win. His gray eyes burned with fury, but he nodded slowly. She was right. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about exposing them all. The city felt colder as Adrian and Joyce left the alley behind. Daniel's words still echoed in Adrian's ears, each one cutting like glass. Tomorrow night. You won't see it coming. They reached the car in silence. Adrian slid into the driver's seat, his grip tightening on the wheel until his knuckles blanched. Joyce sat beside him, watching the storm brewing in his gray eyes. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, dangerous. Daniel. Of all people. He was my brother. He lived in my house. Ate at my table. And now he's standing with them. Joyce's voice was quiet but firm. That's what envy does. It eats people alive. He wanted what you had, and when he couldn't earn it, he chose to steal it. Adrian exhaled sharply, his chest burning. I should have ended it tonight. Joyce's hand touched his arm, grounding him. No. Ending him would make you exactly what Harris wants the world to believe. Reckless, unfit, dangerous. But exposing him, proving the truth, that makes you untouchable. Adrian turned his gaze toward her. For a moment, the fire in his chest eased. She was right. She had been right since the night she kissed him to save his life. She saw things he couldn't. Back at the penthouse, the cracked phone lay on the table again. Adrian picked it up, scrolling through Harris's encrypted messages. His mind worked furiously, piecing together every clue. Joyce leaned over his shoulder, her scarf slipping slightly as she bent closer. "Look at this," she whispered, pointing to another string of numbers. Adrian frowned. "Coordinates." She nodded. "And not just any place. That's the private terminal at JFK. That's where the Saudis will arrive." Adrian's chest tightened. The deal wasn't just happening in the Coal Enterprises tower. It was bigger. International. He set the phone down, his jaw hardening. Then that's where they'll make their move. Harris, Daniel, maybe even my father. They'll use the chaos to cut me out completely. Joyce's voice was steady. "So we get there first. We turn their stage into ours." Adrian looked at her, a flicker of hope sparking through the darkness. "You mean expose them at the deal?" She nodded. "If the Saudis see the corruption for themselves, they won't side with Harris. They'll see who the real heir is. And the board won't be able to hide behind shadows anymore." Adrian's pulse quickened. It was risky, dangerous, but it was the only chance. He paced the room, his mind racing. "We'll need proof. Documents. Transfers. Something Harris can't deny." Joyce tapped the phone. "We already have it. The offshore transfers. The names. We just need to make them visible to the right eyes." Adrian stopped pacing, his gray eyes locking on hers. For the first time in days, a spark of resolve lit within him. "You're right. No more running. No more hiding." He crossed to the window, staring out at the glittering skyline. His reflection looked back at him, not the boy raised under Richard Cole's shadow, but a man standing in his own light. Tomorrow night, he wouldn't just walk into the Saudi deal. He would walk in ready to tear the mask off every single one of them. The weight of the decision settled in the room like a storm before it breaks. Joyce stood beside him, her presence steady, unshakable. Adrian spoke softly, almost to himself. "They think tomorrow ends me." He turned to her, his eyes sharp with determination. "But tomorrow I end them." Morning broke over Manhattan in hues of steel and gold, but Adrian barely noticed the sunrise. He sat at the edge of his penthouse bed, elbows on his knees, Harris's cracked phone in his hand. His reflection stared back at him in the dark screen, a man carrying his father's name, but no longer his father's son. The Saudi deal was tonight. One chance to turn the tables. One chance to prove he wasn't weak, wasn't reckless, wasn't disposable. Joyce entered quietly, a file tucked under her arm. She wore dark slacks and a fitted blouse, her scarf wrapped neatly. 4 years, she had been invisible in this world. But today, she looked like someone stepping into destiny. "Got it," she said, laying the file on the table. "The transfers, the shell companies, even the fake invoices Harris used to cover his trail. It's all here." Adrian lifted the file, flipping through the documents. The evidence was damning. Millions siphoned through offshore accounts, signed under Harris's name. And some documents even traced back to Daniel. He exhaled slowly. "This is it. If we can show this to the Saudis, Harris is finished." Joyce's lips pressed into a line. "If we can stay alive long enough to show them." Her words hung heavy in the air. That afternoon, Adrian called in his most trusted ally outside the company, a longtime family lawyer named Marvin Tate, who had served quietly on the periphery for decades. Marvin arrived in a gray suit, his weathered face lined with both wisdom and caution. "You realize what you're doing?" Marvin asked, flipping through the file. "If you expose this in front of international partners, it won't just destroy Harris. It'll tear Coal Enterprises apart." Adrian's voice was firm. "Then let it tear. I'd rather burn down the rot than inherit a throne built on lies." Marvin studied him, then nodded slowly. You've grown. You sound more like a leader today than I've ever heard." Adrian's chest tightened at the words. He didn't say it, but a small part of him wished they'd come from his father instead. By nightfall, preparations were in motion. Adrian and Joyce dressed in black, blending into the city's shadows. Marvin carried the files in a locked briefcase. The ride to JFK was long and tense. Adrian sat in the back of the car, staring out at the streaks of city light rushing past. Joyce sat beside him, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes steady. "You ready?" she asked softly. Adrian turned to her. For a moment, he just looked at her, the woman who had walked into his life unnoticed and had become the anchor keeping him from sinking. "No," he admitted. Then, after a pause, "But I'm going anyway." A small smile tugged at Joyce's lips. "That's what makes you different from them." When they arrived at the private terminal, the atmosphere was different from the skyscraper's polished halls. The tarmac buzzed with the low hum of jets. Security men in tailored suits stood at every corner, their earpieces glinting faintly. The main hangar had been transformed into a temporary boardroom, its glass walls gleaming under the floodlights. Adrian's pulse quickened. This was it, the battlefield. Joyce's hand brushed against his briefly. He glanced down at her, then back at the glowing hangar. "Time to step into the lion's den," he muttered. Inside the hangar, the atmosphere was electric. The Saudis had arrived. Tall men in flowing white robes, their presence commanding. At their side were interpreters, assistants, and security guards. And there, at the center of the room, stood Michael Harris, Daniel Pierce, and half a dozen Coal Board members. They looked polished, calm, in control. Harris's smile widened when his eyes met Adrian's across the room. "You came," Harris said smoothly, his voice dripping with false warmth. Adrian strode forward, his jaw set. "Of course I did. Wouldn't want to miss my own execution." A ripple of tension passed through the crowd. Harris chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Brave words. But tonight, Adrian, the world will see who's truly fit to lead. Daniel stood beside him, smirking, his arms folded. "Try not to choke, old friend. You're not very good under pressure." Joyce clenched her fists, but Adrian didn't react. He had learned not to take the bait. Instead, he turned to the Saudis, bowing slightly. "Gentlemen, before we begin, I think you should see something." He signaled to Marvin, who stepped forward with the briefcase. But just as Marvin set it on the table, a hand snatched it away. Adrian froze. The briefcase was now in Daniel's hands. He smiled, slow and poisonous. "You didn't think we'd let you walk in here with evidence, did you?" The hangar air grew heavier, silence stretching across the gleaming table as Daniel dangled the briefcase like a prize. Michael Harris's smirk widened. "Really, Adrian? You thought you could outmaneuver us with a few pieces of paper?" He turned to the Saudis, his voice smooth, rehearsed. "Gentlemen, forgive the theatrics. My young associate here is struggling to accept the natural order of leadership. But rest assured, Coal Enterprises remains strong, under capable hands." The Saudis murmured to one another, their eyes shifting between Harris and Adrian. Adrian's pulse pounded in his ears, but he forced himself to stay calm. He couldn't let Harris frame the story. Not here. Not now. He straightened, his voice steady. "Gentlemen, Harris wants you to believe I'm unfit, that this empire needs him. But what he doesn't want you to see," he locked eyes with Daniel, "is the fear behind his smile." Daniel scoffed. "Fear? Don't project your weakness onto me." Adrian stepped closer, his gaze sharp. "If you weren't afraid, Daniel, you wouldn't need to steal my evidence before anyone could see it." The Saudis murmured again, louder this time. Their interpreters leaned closer, translating Adrian's words with quiet urgency. Harris's jaw tightened. Enough games. This deal is about future contracts, not family squabbles. But before he could continue, Joyce stepped forward. She had been quiet until now, but her voice cut through the room like steel. Then let's talk about contracts. I turned to her. Joyce's dark gaze swept the table, steady and unflinching. The documents may be gone, but I memorized the numbers. 10 million wired out of a coal subsidiary to an offshore account. The same account that pays the private security standing outside this hangar right now. Harris's security. Gasps rippled across the room. Harris's mask cracked. She's lying, she's a janitor. Joyce didn't flinch. Yes, a janitor. Which means I've seen this company from the floors you never touch. And unlike you, I don't need to lie to survive. The Saudis' chief delegate leaned forward, his brow furrowing. The weight of Joyce's words settled heavily across the room. Adrian seized the moment, his voice rising with conviction. Gentlemen, leadership isn't about titles or arrogance. It's about truth. And the truth is this. Harris is bleeding this company dry for his own gain. My father may have built this empire, but if you sign with Harris tonight, you're not signing with Coal Enterprises. You're signing with corruption. Silence. Thick, tense, unyielding. The Saudis exchanged rapid words with their interpreters. Then their chief delegate looked directly at Harris, then at Adrian. Finally, he spoke in measured English. We will not commit until these matters are clarified. Harris's face darkened, his composure slipping. Adrian's chest tightened. They hadn't won, not yet. But they had bought themselves something more precious than victory. Time. Outside the hangar, tension rippled through the ranks of security. Adrian and Joyce could feel it. The balance of power shifting, fragile, dangerous. As the meeting adjourned for the night, Harris leaned toward Adrian, his voice a low growl. Enjoy your little speech. Tomorrow you won't be alive to give another. Adrian didn't blink. We'll see. Joyce stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm, her voice low. We're not out yet. But you turned them. I saw it in their eyes. Adrian exhaled slowly, his heart still racing. Then tomorrow, we end this for good. What do you think? Will Adrian and Joyce survive the final strike Harris is planning, or has the trap already closed around them? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and tell me where you're watching from. The city never truly slept, but tonight, New York fell hostile. Its lights harsh, its streets too quiet, every shadow hiding a threat. Back at the penthouse, Adrian paced the living room, his gray eyes restless. The Saudis' hesitation bought him time, but Harris's words echoed in his head. Tomorrow you won't be alive to give another. Joyce sat on the couch, her scarf loosened, exhaustion written across her face. Yet her eyes never wavered. You need to rest, she said softly. Tomorrow will be worse. Adrian shook his head. If I close my eyes now, I might not open them again. Silence stretched between them, heavy with truth neither wanted to admit. Finally, Joyce stood, crossing the room. She touched his arm gently, grounding him. You've carried this burden alone for too long. Let me carry part of it. Adrian looked at her, the storm in his chest easing slightly. You already are. For a moment, the room softened. Two people bound by survival, standing together against impossible odds. But the moment shattered when a knock rattled the door. Adrian tensed instantly. Stay behind me. He opened the door to find Marvin Tate, the old family lawyer, his expression grim. They know where you are, Marvin said urgently. Harris isn't waiting for tomorrow. He's moving tonight. Adrian's stomach sank. What do you mean? Marvin stepped inside, closing the door quickly. I intercepted chatter from one of the board's private lines. Harris has men on their way here now. They're not coming to negotiate. They're coming to eliminate. Joyce's breath caught. We have to go. Adrian grabbed his jacket, adrenaline surging. We'll head to the safe house uptown. But Marvin shook his head. No. It's compromised. Harris already has eyes there. The only chance is to split. Confuse them, make it harder to track you. Adrian froze. Split. No. Joyce stays with me. Marvin's voice sharpened. Adrian, if you want her alive, you'll send her somewhere Harris can't predict. Right now, being with you is the most dangerous place she could be. Joyce's heart pounded. She hated the logic, but part of her knew Marvin was right. Still, the thought of leaving Adrian alone felt like betrayal. She looked at him, her voice steady but trembling at the edges. If we split, we may not find each other again. Adrian gripped her hands tightly, his chest burning. Then we don't split. I won't let him take you from me. But before either could say more, the building's power cut out. Darkness swallowed the penthouse. The silence was deafening. Then came the sound of boots, heavy, deliberate, climbing the stairwell outside. Joyce's breath quickened. They're here. Adrian moved fast, pulling her toward the back hallway. We need to move now. Marvin followed, his flashlight slicing through the dark. The service stairwell. It'll take us to the garage. They pushed through the door just as the first gunshot shattered the penthouse windows. Glass rained down, the night exploding in violence. Adrian shielded Joyce with his body as they stumbled down the stairwell, the sound of boots and shouts echoing above them. But halfway down, another figure appeared at the landing below, blocking their path. Joyce froze. Adrian's heart stopped. It wasn't Harris. It wasn't Daniel. It was Marvin. And in his hand was a gun. Adrian's chest constricted, disbelief tearing through him. Marvin. The old lawyer's eyes were cold now, stripped of the warmth he had carried for decades. I'm sorry, Adrian. Truly. But loyalty doesn't pay like Harris does. Joyce's voice cracked with fury. You led us into a trap. Marvin's jaw tightened. No. I led you to the end. The stairwell echoed with advancing footsteps above and below. They were surrounded. Adrian stepped in front of Joyce, his voice low, steady. If you're going to shoot, Marvin, do it. But know this, you'll never kill the truth. Marvin raised the gun, his finger tightening on the trigger. And the stairwell filled with blinding light as the door behind them burst open. The stairwell blazed with harsh light as the door above burst open. Armed men in black suits stormed down, their weapons drawn, their shouts echoing off the concrete walls. Marvin didn't flinch. His gun was still leveled at Adrian. It's over, he said, his voice flat, almost weary. There's no escaping this time. Adrian stepped forward, shielding Joyce behind him. You've known me since I was a child. And you'd put a bullet in me for Harris's money? Marvin's jaw tightened, but his eyes flickered with something. Guilt, perhaps. I warned your father years ago. You weren't ready. Harris offered me a chance to survive what's coming. Don't make me regret it. Joyce's voice cut through, sharp as glass. If you pull that trigger, Marvin, you'll regret it until your last breath. For a moment, Marvin hesitated. Then he squeezed the trigger. Bang! Adrian yanked Joyce to the side, the bullet slamming into the wall inches from her head. The stairwell erupted in chaos. Adrian lunged, tackling Marvin with raw fury. The gun clattered across the floor, sliding down the steps. Joyce scrambled, grabbing it before one of the suited men could. Her hand shook, but she raised it, aiming squarely at the men charging down. Back! she shouted, her voice trembling but fierce. For the first time they hesitated. A janitor holding a gun was not what they expected. Meanwhile, Adrian and Marvin wrestled on the landing, fists flying, years of betrayal boiling over. Marvin was older, but desperation lent him strength. He slammed Adrian against the wall, his forearm crushing against Adrian's throat. "You'll never win," Marvin growled, spit flying. "Your father's already chosen Harris. You're nothing but a pawn." Adrian's gray eyes blazed with rage. "Then I'll be the pawn that topples the board." With a surge of strength, he twisted, slamming Marvin against the railing. The metal groaned under the impact. Marvin's eyes widened as Adrian's fist connected hard. Blood spattered across the concrete. The old lawyer staggered, gasping for breath. And then he slipped. Marvin tumbled backward over the railing, his scream echoing as he plummeted down the stairwell. The sickening thud that followed silenced the room. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but ragged breathing and the pounding of Adrian's heart. Joyce's grip tightened on the gun, her eyes wide with shock. The men above roared, snapping back into action. "Take them." Adrian grabbed Joyce's hand. "Move." They bolted down the stairs, Joyce firing a warning shot that ricocheted off the railing, sending sparks flying. The men ducked, giving them precious seconds to escape. They crashed through a service door, stumbling into the underground garage. The smell of oil and rubber filled the air. Engines revved. Harris's men were already here. Adrian yanked Joyce behind a column as bullets tore across the concrete. Shards rained down, the air thick with smoke and chaos. "Adrian!" Joyce shouted over the gunfire. "We can't outrun them forever." Adrian's chest heaved. He knew she was right. They were cornered, outnumbered. But then his eyes landed on a black SUV parked near the exit, its engine idling, its headlights glowing faintly. Hope sparked. "We don't need to outrun them," he said, his voice sharp. "We just need to break through." He squeezed Joyce's hand. "On my count." Her dark eyes locked on his. Trust. Fear. Resolve. 1, 2. Adrian bolted from behind the column, dragging her with him as bullets ripped through the air. 3. They dove into the SUV, Adrian slamming the driver out of the seat, Joyce crawling across to the passenger side. The engine roared. Tires screeched. Bullets shattered the rear window as Adrian floored the accelerator, the SUV tearing through the garage like a beast unleashed. The exit ramp loomed ahead. Men scrambled to block it. Adrian didn't slow. With a deafening crash, the SUV smashed through the barricade, bursting onto the night-soaked streets of New York. They were alive. Barely, but alive. Inside the SUV, Joyce's chest heaved, her hands trembling. She turned to Adrian, her voice breaking. "How much longer can we run?" Adrian's jaw was tight, his eyes burning with fury. "Not much longer. Which is why we stop running." Joyce's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" He gripped the wheel tighter. "Tomorrow, the board meets again. Harris thinks I'll be dead before then. But I'll be there. And I'll burn his lies to the ground." Joyce studied him, fear mixing with pride. He wasn't just Richard Cole's heir anymore. He was a man ready to claim his own destiny.
Thank you so much for staying with me till the very end of this story. If there's one lesson we can take away, it's this. Sometimes the people the world overlooks are the very ones who carry the greatest courage, loyalty, and strength. Never underestimate anyone. If you enjoyed this video, please support the channel by subscribing, sharing it with your friends and loved ones, and leaving your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us keep bringing you powerful stories every single day. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that will move your heart and surprise you in ways you won't expect. And before you go, check out the previous video now showing on your screen. I promise, you don't want to miss it.